Okay. Hi, Bob.
Hey,
Good
Paulo.
morning. How are you?
I am wonderful. How are you?
Doing great. We are about a minute early, or a few seconds early. Let's give a few moments for our guests to join in. And I see there were some people waiting in the waiting room. Now they are started to join. Then we will start. In fact, it is 5 o'clock right now in Italy. How about there? 9 o'clock? What is it?
10 o'clock. 10
10,
o'clock. 10 in the morning.
10 in the morning. Oh, San Valentine Day. No,
I know.
that is
Yeah.
tomorrow. Sorry.
Tomorrow. Yeah.
That
Don't
is
get me in
tomorrow.
trouble. Don't
Oh,
get me
yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
trouble.
You're right. Now we got it. Okay, very good. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Bob. Today we're talking about competency in the IECEx scheme and the fact that we need competency. So maybe we should start, uh, give a little introduction to our guest on Bob. Bob, for those of you who have not met him yet, has a lot of years of experience in the EX world and is a CompEx instructor, has also an instructor in the IECEx Competency Scheme. And it is an inspector. In fact, we were just talking about inspections going to do tomorrow, right? On
Today.
today on FPSO. Yes. So he is, I mean, probably the expert in EX application. Let's put it this way. We will talk a little bit about GMI. Take only a few moments. Let me turn this off because otherwise I'm gonna keep getting cold.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about GMI because we're presenting this webinar and I have to give you this presentation. So we designed GMI is a safety company that design, engineer, manufactures a complete range of intrinsically safe and seal certified devices for all automation packages such as DCS, ESD, fire and gas, and so on. We apply them in many, many industries, from oil and gas to energy, petrochemical. I just talked to our Japanese head yesterday that we just won a project on green hydrogen in Japan, for example. And we have a lot of years of experience. And we are 100% an Italian company, manufacture and design engineer in our Italian headquarters, but we are global players present in all the continent. Next, please, Bob. Okay, so we have different subsidiaries, as we just said, Japan, USA, Singapore, many other, Dubai, and so on. We have many installations around the globe, and we make safety products. Therefore, we try to make them as good as possible. We use state-of-the-art technology. We do 100% testing. Just the fact that the Japanese, I was talking to the Japanese guy yesterday, I bring that to mind. And one of the gas compressor manufacturers in Japan visited us last week, and they were very, very impressed on how we manufacture. And, to impress a Japanese company, that's something, because they're very thorough, very, very detailed. Every little things matter to them. So anyhow, and we do this because we care. We care about the environment. We care about the people that use our product because in the end, they're safety product. They provide for the safety and availability of the plant. Okay, next. And we, not just Paolo stands behind this words, but our certification. We have over 15 independent agencies certified to global standards. We, of course, have TV, functional safety management certification up to SEAL 3, ISO 9001, 45000, ROS, REACH compliant, and many, many other standards we abide to. In fact, we are now going ESG 27000 certification. Next is sorry. Okay, some name. Well, we skip one, but it's okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Don't matter. It was just names of people we sell to. It's a lot of people. So we supply our product. You can see here, IS barrier, safety relays with and without line monitoring, up to SEAL 3, isolator, also SEAL certified, power supply, which are EX and SEAL certified, multiplexer for temperature, digital signal, for art multiplexer, all host of termination panel to interface directly with DCS and ESD of many, many companies, from ABB, Yokogawa, Schneider, whatever, you name it. And of course, a line of SPD. And it's missing here. So if our new product, which we just launched 2 days ago, which is called X1 series, which is a universal I/O with intelligence on board. Eventually, one day you can look up our webinars. We are presenting it, and of course, we do courses on EX and functional safety. Next, I think next is okay. You're going back. These are
No,
customers.
Yeah, this is what we have.
Okay, sorry, then it's my fault. So these are customers. Let's go next. Okay, so now it's you. So that guy that sent you the presentation, our marketing guy, I'll have a talk with him.
Yeah, don't blame it on me. Don't blame it
No,
on me.
not blame it on it. So I let before let Bob talk about or get over with the presentation, let me mention that you have a way to talk with us, which is for question and answer. We already took the question you sent via when you signed up. So we will discuss those at the end of the presentation. But if you have any question, just type it in and we'll try to answer. Okay,
Yeah,
Bob, go ahead.
absolutely.
I'm here listening.
All right. Well, thank you, Paulo. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. And we've done quite a few different webinars with GMI, and it's always been fun. I don't, as Paulo mentioned, we have our own company in Houston, Texas, and we do a lot of training and inspections and of course, the question usually comes up from people is like, well, what do I need to know? Or why is this important? Or all of this information with regards to competency? Because we hear competency and we see it in all different walks of life, right? And so what is competency? We have to understand that. So competency truly is a combination of knowledge, skills, and behavior. So when we say maybe a college graduate or somebody who studies something, but yet they haven't actually applied it, well, they have the knowledge, but they don't necessarily have the skills at that particular point. They learn that maybe on the job. In some cases, we learn skills on the job. We may learn it, but yet we didn't necessarily have the knowledge. So competency, when you really achieve true competency, you have both the underpinning of knowledge, and then you're able to have the behavior that associates that with it, and then demonstrating it in your skills in whatever walk of life, right? Like learning to drive a car. You have the knowledge, you know the rules of the road, but then you have to demonstrate the skills, actually understand, what a brake does and all that other good stuff and how to park. So again, we do competency in everything in our life, and it's important, but we don't necessarily think about it all the time. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a ton of experience to be competent, but it does require you to know the tasks required of your position, right? So we use different examples, but in the electrical side of things, when we take a person that maybe has a good electrical background, they may know a tremendous amount of how to wire up something, but they don't necessarily know exactly all the details from wiring up electrical systems in, say, a hazardous location, a drilling rig or an offshore oil platform or a plant, a refinery, or what have you. So there may be a different additional skill set that individual understands or needs to understand. And again, they require different skills and knowledge. And the important thing is the demonstration of the capacity to perform those tasks. So generally speaking, you have to be assessed in order to be able to determine whether or not you are competent. Think of it like an airline pilot, right? Every time an airline pilot wants to become a pilot for a different plane, a different series of planes, well, they have to be trained and then they have to be assessed. You'll have a senior pilot that will come in and sit with them and watch and see what they do in the simulator. They'll take them out, obviously, and fly around, and they're being assessed. And you have to undergo this assessment. It's an ongoing assessment because your skills can diminish. It's something that is not necessarily once you've learned it, you learned it for life. Technology changes, so you have to kind of stay on top of everything. That's kind of the important thing to remember there. So where did competency in the hazardous location, equipment, installations, and design really come from, if you will? And really, you can kind of pinpoint it to this one particular accident that took place in 1988. It was the Piper Alpha explosion that took place, and about 167 people lost their life. And Piper Alpha accounted for about 10% of the total North Sea production. And this really changed the industry. Up until that point in time, it was somewhat a little bit of the wild, wild west that we might consider. And then some of the lessons that we learned after Piper Alpha specifically somewhat changed. Well, it did. It changed industry, and I think for the better. There was a lot of things that we learned off the Piper Alpha explosion. There was an investigation that took place, and it took 2 years to publish the final report. And there was a 106 recommendations that was made off that. And one of the primary reforms undertaken that the employer should be responsible for the competency of its employees. So this was really kind of the first stab, if you will, with regards to competency showing up either in a regulatory type framework or even within the standards. So now it was all of a sudden it's put out there, and it was again, this was really driven not so much by the regulators, but it was driven by industry to start saying, hey, we need to make sure that our individuals are competent in what they're doing. So there are a bunch of standards that have been written worldwide that define competency, and actually even within other standards that don't deal with electrical, you will find competency showing up in all different kinds of IEC, ISO standards. But when we're talking about electrical and instrumentation systems, the main standards are the IEC and the ISO standards, specifically around the 60079-14. The 14 is a design standard, the 17 is an inspection standard, excuse me, and the -34 is a quality standard for manufacturers. So this is now showing up, and the requirements for competency are been published in these standards, and they've been published for many, many years now. And then you're also finding different regulators and country-specific organizations that are starting to mandate competency as well. So some of the regulators that are out there that are actually regulating and demanding competency, you have the HSC in the UK, you have the US Coast Guard here in the United States, you have NOPSEMA in Australia, you have many different organizations that are actually starting to get into this and starting to regulate this and starting to demand this of the owner operators, the people that are actually involved in this business. And as an example, there was a safety alert that came out from the US Coast Guard here in the United States. And this was kind of the first real shot across the bow to kind of like force industry to make a statement to say, hey, look, we have to be compliant with the requirements of competency. And again, the US Coast Guard, after the Deepwater Horizon explosion, started to adopt some of the IEC standards. And actually in the marine business, for example, LNG ships, that's primarily the standards that they're following are the IEC standards, not North American standards. And again, these are all kind of referencing things that inspections shall be done by competent people, repairs should be done by competent people. And what the Coast Guard had basically found was they were going in and doing these inspections and finding things that were just completely wrong, either not maintained or hadn't been designed properly at the get-go. So we
have a poll. Let me launch this poll. I think, do you see, guys, the poll?
So there's actually 2 correct answers on this one.
Okay, what standard defines the specific level of competency? Well, one you just mentioned, and I see that people started to answer the correct answer, if I remember correctly. But you said there is 2 of them, right?
Yeah, there's actually 2 different standards and that are where they're defined, but actually, and there is a brand new standard that we'll talk about that's actually kind of superseded.
But this question, can you have a multiple choice or not?
Yeah. You could answer. Well, I think you're only able to answer one, but
I don't know. It depends how they were set up by marketing. You should have told them.
That's okay.
It's okay. It's okay. It's just a test, making sure that you know, we keep you awake. Okay, let me do this, and I think everyone answered correctly, basically.
Yeah.
Sh- sh-
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. I think you see it right now, right?
Yep, I see it. So yeah, the 17 is an inspection standard. Now 14 is really the standard in which the levels or the various roles and responsibility for the design, installation, and maintenance are there's inspection or competency requirements. And of course, the competency requirements also show up in the inspection requirements. And then the dash 34 is requiring competency of the manufacturers that are building EX equipment. So really, all three of the, C, D, and E are all really correct answers.
Very good.
So if we kind of move on, we of course had Piper Alpha in 1988, and things industry somewhat moved along and everything else, and then we obviously had Deepwater Horizon that happened in 2010, and this was obviously a tremendous disaster that we experienced here in the Gulf of Mexico, or now I guess Gulf of America now that we have to call it. But of course, the economic impact, and actually that's a little bit low. The economic impact was actually more like about $50 billion. And it changed a lot of the industry here in the United States in the offshore industry. And there was a lot of changes that came about specifically around drilling operations with regards to the BOPs and the regulations and all that other good stuff. So a lot of really positive things that did come out of this, even though it was a horrible, horrible event. But it did somewhat change industry a little bit, well, quite a bit in the offshore industry. One of the things that you may have seen the movie that came out, and it was very accurate. There was a lot of things in there. There was, of course, Hollywood, but one of the things that did come out on the final report that was published by the U.S. Coast Guard was they could never really determine exactly what the source of ignition was that ignited the flammable gas on board. However, they had done an inspection on a lot of electrical equipment that was on the drill floor, which number one should not have been there, but it was in very, very bad condition, severely corroded. And they theorized that that potentially could have been the source of ignition that actually set it off. But again, that was a catastrophic release, and it could have been any number of things. But that was one thing that that a lot of people kind of keyed in on over the standpoint that electrical equipment could have been the source of ignition. Now, what you see there as far as pictures, those are actually pictures of equipment that's actually in service in a hazardous location. And you can tell, as a matter of fact, the product on the far left, that's actually an EX motor located in a zone 1 area, a shell shaker area on an offshore oil rig. And you can see that it's in pretty bad shape. The housing is almost completely corroded through. The middle picture is of a bell, and then you can see on the right-hand side just the condition of some of this equipment. The offshore market is certainly a very, very onerous, corrosive type environment, but we still see this same type of thing for onshore production facilities, refineries, certainly onshore drilling operations, because we have some pretty nasty stuff that we're dealing in. The one thing that is important to understand here is that the certification isn't really the whole issue, right? Because we can go and get certified equipment, but if we don't design it right, we don't install it correct, and we don't maintain it, then all the money that we have spent up front is basically somewhat been negated over the standpoint that it just doesn't get properly put into service. So it's always important to understand that there is a human element associated with this. Oops. So a lot of people, when I talk about this to engineers, they always say, well, it's always those idiots in operations that are the ones who are responsible, right? And in many cases it is. However, this was an interesting report that was done years ago by the HSC in the UK. And they started looking at the root causes of some major industrial accidents. And if you notice, the biggest root cause of major industrial accidents are actually at the specifications, meaning that maybe it was specified incorrectly, or maybe it wasn't designed around proper specifications, but it actually started off, very, very early on. It wasn't actually the idiots out in the field. It was the idiots in a drafting room, or
non-competent.
they were not competent when they were starting off the project. And this is one thing that I see in the real world, is that a lot of the people that are actually doing the installations, they are very sharp. But if you start off with a product that's not suitable or not right, it doesn't matter how good of an install you're doing, it's still not going to be right because the product is not selected appropriately for the environment. And no matter what you do, it doesn't you are, it's not going to be a safe installation. So again, we have to really focus our attention at the very early stages to make sure that our specifications are clear, that they're detailed, and that we understand that these are going to be suitable for the environment in which we're going into. So just as an example, right, what you see on the right-hand side was a gas detection panel that was located in a Zone 2 area, but you see very clearly on this label says it's for use in a non-hazardous area. So people ask, how many faults do we typically find when we go into a facility? How many problems do we actually find? And in some cases, it's fairly small. It can be pretty small, but generally speaking, it's usually a range of 20 to 45% of something that isn't right. Now, some of these can be as simple as maybe a label is missing, and that's not necessarily a safety critical issue. But in some cases, it could be maybe the improper cable gland, or maybe the product is not suitable for the environment based upon the temperature code or gas group or zone. So some of these can be a little bit more critical, or even things like bolts left out of a flame-proof enclosure. And again, it could be incorrect installation, selection, poor maintenance, and again, a lack of training, lack of knowledge, lack of competence.
So we're lucky there are not explosions every week.
So that's a great question. And how come we don't have explosions every week? So if you think about it while you guys are answering this question, you have flammable gases and vapors that generally are not released into the environment. Generally, they should be contained, in pipes, tanks, and what have you. And we don't typically have electrical or instrumentation equipment in those environments, other than we may have sensors which need to be protected by intrinsically safe or some other means. But generally speaking, we're not going to have electrical equipment in the environments in which those gases and vapors are continuously present. However, if the gases and vapors, every gas and vapor has a lower and upper flammable limit. And so we have to have the right combination of fuel air mixture, number one. We have to have that source of ignition taking place, an ignition source at the exact same time in which it's released. And then certainly it must be able to propagate in a particular manner in which it's uncontrolled. So it's kind of like a Swiss cheese, right? You have to have all these things happen concurrently
At the same time.
at the same time.
So
that's why
chances are low, but the consequences are very high.
that's right. Probabilities are low, but the consequences are high.
Okay, here's the answer we have. I think you said specification was the leading root cause of industrial accident, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it is actually specifications. And again, we have faults in all different areas, but specifications certainly are a big one.
Okay, here it is, what you answer. It's
Yeah.
majority of you answer correctly, but also open maintenance, they're also cause of accident.
Right.
Okay.
Now this has been changed. The IEC 60079-14 has been updated to 2024, and it is changed a little bit. So this isn't necessarily the most recent, but in Annex A of the older standard, it was divided into 3 roles where competency was basically required. And it would divide them up into responsible persons, operator technicians, and designers. So if I was a designer of a system, then I'd want to key in on what does the standard say specifically for my role. If I was a person that's doing the installations, well, I want to focus on that. If I'm a manager who's responsible for this project, then I want to focus on those roles. And it's just the same thing. Competencies, the knowledge and skills, and the competencies.
Right.
And again, the standard will go into it and give you a lot more details. Now, this Annex A is only a handful of pages. There's not much to it, but it basically will spell it out. And then, of course, it also talks about assessment. Now, the one thing that's important to note here is sometimes people think that I must be assessed by a third party. That's not what the standard says. The standard can be a situation where a lot of this can be done internally. It can be internal training. It can be an internal process that an organization takes upon themselves to make sure that their individuals meet these requirements. But in many cases, a lot of companies will actually ask for third-party verification or assessment of these individuals, and that's where some of these competency programs really come into play. And there's a couple other areas in which competency is required, and this is for intrinsic safety. When you're creating a descriptive system document, that is done by a person that is competent. That DSD is the loop diagram required for every intrinsically safe circuit. So if you're using a GMI barrier in conjunction with the Rosemont transmitter, somebody has to generate that descriptive system document to make sure that it matches. And that document should stay with the life of the project. So somebody can go and take a look at it afterwards, and it should be done by a competent person. So we have similar type situations, again, in the United States. Now, a lot of people don't realize it, but it is in the standards. The competency for manufacturers are basically slightly different, and usually the manufacturers are audited by a third party that will come in. And this is a bolt-on, if you will, to your ISO 9001. If you have a quality process already, well, now we're introducing some additional requirements based upon this standard for manufacturers that build EX equipment. Because what was happening is that manufacturers would actually supply product, and we, GMI as an example, not that GMI ever supplies a product that's mismarked or anything else, but I have dealt with other manufacturers in which we supply, in which the product isn't properly marked, it's mislabeled, there's missing something or whatever it is. Now, they should be able to catch that in their quality process, but it does happen. So that's where this standard is coming into play, to make sure that the manufacturers are doing everything they can, that when they produce this product, it's actually as per the specification and it's correct. This standard, this technical specification was published actually it's not 2021, it was actually published last year, or 2023. And this was the technical specification 44, where it took personal competency, took all of the information from the various other standards and put them in one big technical specifications. And this is, it did come out in 2023. And before, the competency was limited to operators, technicians, designers, and it's now expanded to discuss procurement, training, management, commissioning, and other tasks and responsibilities in the EX supply chain, if you will. So there's a big emphasis on the human side of safety and compliance for the entire life cycle of the EX system. So this is where it's now really starting to, you're starting to see companies really start getting into this and starting to demand this, and even the regulators are starting to put this into play. So getting to where we're talking about here is the competency of personnel. There are really a lot of people are familiar with the IECEx certification scheme for products, but they have a couple different schemes, and one scheme is actually the personnel competency. And this is what we're talking about today. This is, and you can find a lot of this information on the IECEx website. So there are various modules that are out there that individuals can actually be assessed to, and these are the various modules. And so generally speaking, it's not just a catch-all be-all that everybody should take all of these modules. It's kind of a pick and choose, if you will, and it's up to you as the individual, if you decide to embark upon this, and consult with the certification body or the recognized training provider to kind of determine, hey, which best fits my needs. If I'm an installer, well, I need to make sure that I do the EX003, which is installations. But if I'm doing design work, I would do the 009. The 001 is somewhat of the fundamentals, and almost every other module is more or less, that's a prerequisite to take the other ones. The 000 is a very general overview, basic knowledge, where 001 is a little bit more detailed. And this is all based upon the IEC 60079 and 80079 standards, which, if you're not familiar, there is all the mechanical equipment now fall under the IEC 80079 standards for ignition sources. So that's also covered within the COPC program. So is training actually a requirement under this? And it's actually not. This is one thing that people are somewhat surprised about. We provide this training. We do this, and we have a class next week and the week after that, and we'll provide the training for the various modules. But as a student, you do not actually have to engage and go through a formalized training program. The program was really meant as an assessment program for the individuals to determine whether or not you're competent around those particular modules. Now, most people will actually engage with a training company to do the training, and then they'll go ahead and get assessed. But in many cases, people can just go and say, you know what, I already know this. I just want to get assessed, and it's a shorter process, and it's going to be things involving either exams and practical assessments. So there's practical exercises and written exams. So which modules? Again, I mentioned this already, but the 001 is the fundamentals. Different roles and responsibilities can be a combination thereof. These can be done all at once, or they can be done over time. So you have a little bit of freedom and flexibility to be able to take these at your leisure, so to speak. So how does the certifying body get involved in this? So the certification bodies, the same organizations that certify product, many of them also certify people. And this is on the IECEx website, and you can reach out to any of those certifying bodies and ask them about this program. The important thing to note is not all certifying bodies have every module within their scope. And if you want to know more about the scheme specifically, there is a free document on the IECEx website, the Operational Document 504, that is, again, free. It's available. You can download it. It's really good to read. It talks at length about each one of the modules and how the students are actually assessed. There's also what is called an IECEx recognized training provider, and our organization is a training provider. So they're located worldwide. You can go onto the IECEx website and you can find them. We're vetted and approved by the IECEx to deliver it, but you're not mandated to come to a training provider. As much as I would love for you to have to come to me, you don't have to. You can also be assessed with no training. The benefit, I guess, of going through the training, then it's pretty much we're training them to hopefully have success under the assessments. And of course, we have assessment gear here in our location that we can actually do and put people through. So there's an example of a practical assessment for an installation. They can be fixed or portable. Each certifying body will come up with their own practical exercises. And so every certification body may have slightly different layouts of what we're actually going to assess you against. So typically the exams are a combination of multiple choice and open-ended. And again, there is going to be generally some practical assessments. They generally are open book, open standards, and they're based upon, again, the 60079 and 80079 standards. The RTPs typically will have course books and notes that are available. Generally, as an RTP, we'll administer the exams, but the certification body will in turn, they'll score them and determine if the candidate passes or fails, and then they issue an IECEx COPC certificate to the candidate. So as an example for prerequisites, for 001, there is no prerequisite. For other modules, generally speaking, what the IECEx wants is individuals should have 3 years of experience in the field in some way, shape, or form, okay? So that's generally, before you embark in this, you can certainly take the 001, but some of the other modules, generally all of the certifying bodies are going to insist upon a 3-year level of experience. The training itself can be done in person or it can be done virtual. So Practical assessments need to be in person at this point. So there is basically, there's online, there's in person, different ways of delivering this information. The certificates, when they get issued, they're good for 5 years, and this is somewhat what they look like. They'll have your picture on there. They'll be issued by an IECEx certifying body. That's an older one that I have from years and years ago. I need to update that one, but that's what they look like. And you can search this on the IECEx database, just like you're searching for an IECEx certificate. A lot of people are not aware that this is actually on the IECEx website, but it's actually there. The nice thing about that is that you can use this to validate whether or not an individual has actually got their qualification. Or if you're looking for, say, an inspector that might have a particular module, you can actually do a database search and you can pull up all the individuals that may be qualified under that particular module. And it makes it nice and easy for people to find each other, so to speak. So again, it's needed now more than ever. It's in the international codes and standards. The regulators are starting to mandate this. And again, under the IECEx scheme, the training is not a requirement, but the assessment is. And here's the thing that I tell people, it's like, get trained, get certified. But even if you just do your own training yourself or just do your own research, just find out more. There's a lot of great information. There's a lot of really good information out there that you can download, you can look, you can watch videos. There's tremendous amount of stuff out there. And a lot of that is, as long as you can learn one little thing in EX, that can make a difference, right? And we don't want people to be the weakest link. So now with that, we will bring into
the question and answer.
Yeah, let me stop
And
sharing right now, and I will
yeah,
bring up.
I can share myself. Let me try that.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah, I got it. Should be able to see it, correct?
Yes.
Does it look good?
Looks good for me.
Okay, good. If it's good for you, it should be for everybody else. So
Okay.
while I get this going, there was a question about corrosion. Is there a way to say what is safe and unsafe? I guess.
Yeah. So that is a difficult thing to determine. It depends on the type of corrosion and what protection concept that we're using. So for example, if we have a flame-proof enclosure, the enclosure itself is designed to withstand an internal explosion, right? So if we have a severe case of corrosion, like for example, that motor, it probably would not contain an internal explosion. But usually it's not so much that we're really concerned with, because they're usually not quite that bad. But what we wanted to do is make sure that all the flame paths are free from corrosion. So if we have a flat flange, we want to make sure that there's no pitting on the flame paths, no damage to the threads. So that's where we're really
Anywhere
focused on.
in the standard dimension about corrosion, what checks you have to do, stuff like that, or not?
It does a little bit in the -17 standard, but it doesn't define specifically, how bad it shall be. It's a little bit of an interpretation by each
Okay.
inspector.
Okay.
Now,
Okay, good. Sorry.
yeah,
Let
no,
me
no
go
worries.
through the question that we receive. And guys, if you want to ask questions, just type it in. How does ICEX certification compare with IECEx and other regional schemes? And this is your answer.
Yeah. So ATEX is a legal requirement within the European Union, and the IECEX is a certification scheme. So they're somewhat apples and oranges.
Okay.
However, under ATEX, they recognize the EN standards, which are the Euro norm standards, which are based upon the IEC standards. So technically, they are identical, with the exception of the annexes within the EN versions. The IECEx has certification bodies, and ATEX has certification bodies, which are known as notified bodies. There is one big difference between ATEX and IECEX. Zone 2 equipment, the manufacturers can self-declare suitability for hazardous locations, where under IECEX it's not. And generally, manufacturers will have certifications. In many cases, they'll get a certificate, an ATEX certificate, and they'll get an IECEX certificate from the same certification body, because that body is both an IECEX certifying body and a European notified body. So
Absolutely.
they'll get it done at the same time, because they don't have to run two tests.
Sorry, I went too fast.
No,
There
that's
is a question. How does the ICEx define and assess competency for different roles? Then this is the answer you prepared.
yeah. So again, there's the IEC standards, the 14, 17, and the 44. There's that operational document. And I have to also be fair to say this too. The IECEx COPC program is available, but it's not the only competency program out there. And again, it's not specifically referenced within the IEC standards, even though the IECEx is a member of or a subgroup of the IEC. There's another organization competency program out there, which is called Compex, and we teach Compex as well. That's
In
the
fact,
oldest. I'm sorry?
in fact, we have a question. They want to know which is better.
Oh,
You're
goodness.
teaching both, and maybe you can give us your
I
feedback.
can give you the honest to God's truth. I'll talk about that here. Well, I'll tell it now. It's somewhat so Compex, I will say this much. You can go to any Compex center in the world and they're all virtually identical. Because they're regulated very closely by an organization called JT Limited out of the UK. They own they disperse the licenses to organizations that are deemed worthy of being able to provide this program. And they make it very, very clear as to what you need to have, how it has to be delivered, and the course materials and everything else. Under the IECEx, it's a little bit more, I don't want to say loosey-goosey, but that's probably the term that I would say. The IECEx, there can be variations between the different certifying bodies, even though they're using the same overall operational document to develop what is our competency program, if you will. It's left up to the certification bodies to really come up and implement it. So where one certifying body could say, this is what you have to do in order to determine your competency, where another certification body might have a different means. Now, the exams are all going to be the same. The written exams, no matter where you go, are going to be identical on the IECEx. Same thing holds true under Compex. It's the practical assessments under the IECEx can be different from center to center. So
Okay.
Compex in Compex is a little bit more UK centric. So there's some things that we talk and teach within Compex that we wouldn't necessarily teach within the IECEx. And depending on the training provider, for example, we'll cover a lot of mechanical information in some of our fundamental courses, where that's a separate course altogether under Compex.
Well, you guys
They're
can
both good.
They can come to you and take both.
Yeah, I will say this much. For anybody who has their Compex or anybody who has their IECEx, if they, I personally, it's very similar materials. We write basically the course notes for both of them, and there's a ton of overlap. So it's not, I would say it's kind of not worthwhile to do both, although some companies will insist that you must have this qualification and others insist that you must have this qualification.
Another question about conduit being used more as a area, or it's primary for cable and glands? I guess both.
Yeah, it is both. And certainly here in the United States, I grew up familiar with conduit systems. We use an awful lot of conduit systems for onshore. For offshore markets, it's primarily a cable market. In the international world, it's again the same. You'll find a lot of conduit installations. You'll find a lot of cable installations. If it's offshore, it's pretty much cable installations. Onshore, it's a mixture. You're going to find a lot of conduit applications. It depends on where the influence is really coming from or who the engineering and design is coming from. One thing that is a little bit different that we don't typically do in the United States, but you see this in the international world, is open-ended conduit, where generally speaking in the US, when we use conduit, we use bare individual conductors, and we'll run those through conduit, where open conduit, you're running, say, an unarmored cable through basically a pipe, and that's providing the mechanical protection. The alternative is to use an armored cable to protect the cable from mechanical damage.
Going back to our competency scheme, there was a question, is ICEX competency recognized in EU under IECEx rules?
So it's really, to my knowledge, there's the HSC in the UK does recognize Compex, but I don't know personally if they insist. And it's important. I know I've had many conversations with the U.S. Coast Guard about that topic. Like, can a regulator force a company or an individual to go through one or the other? The issue is that both the IECEx and Compex are for-profit organizations, right? And the moment you start getting a governmental agency insisting and putting a regulation that states that you must engage with a for-profit organization, that opens up a whole Pandora of problems, right? So most of the regulators around the world are just saying that it should be a recognized competency program. Now, that's the regulator side. On the other side, companies certainly they can do whatever they want to do. So I've seen kind of a mixture, if you will, of clients out there that will insist upon one versus the other. The project I'm doing with this inspection of a crane for an FPSO, they will accept, the client in this case would accept either. So yeah, the regulators generally, I know HSC in some cases in the UK, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe the HSC basically, well, whether or not they actually say Compex or not, I don't know for sure.
Well, it's like a certification, in the US, you have several bodies that can certify it according to the standards, but then you have a customer who says, I want UL certification.
Right,
Regardless if FM or somebody else can give you the same, according to the same standard, you
right.
still, so. Okay, what is the main difference between NFPA, NEC code, and the ICEX?
Yeah. So that's always a good question, right?
That's always a good question.
So the
Very
NFPA
similar, no?
and people around the world, when they run into American projects, they'll hear about the National Electric Code. And formally, this is the National Fire Protection Agency Document 70, and it's a design and installation scheme. And this is for every electrical installation, not just hazardous locations. And of course, the IECEx is a certification scheme based upon the relevant IEC standards. So really, the real comparison is between the NEC and the IEC is around Articles 500 or 505 and 506, which are the zone concept installation design, and the 6007914, which is the design and installation around the zone concept. So there's a lot of similarities between Articles 505 and 506 when you really break it down and compare that versus the design installation from 14. There are some differences, however, with regards to sealing of enclosures, the cable types. But the one thing that, from a big picture standpoint, the protection concepts that are recognized within the NEC under the zone concept are the same protection concepts that we recognize under the IEC. So flame-proof, intrinsic safety, pressurization, optical radiation, oil immersion, all of those concepts that we're familiar with in the increased safety, all of those concepts are recognized within NEC 505. However, within the NEC, there's also a Article 501, which is our class and division concept, which is a different system. And there are different requirements under that are not spelled out under 505 and 506. So
Which is the most prevalently used, though, in the US, right?
that's
Because
right.
that's
Article
almost
50,
501 rather than 506 and 505.
yeah, we introduced the zone concept in 1996, but there was one big difference between, say, Canada and the United States, although Canada might become the 51st state from what I understand. So Article 501, when it was introduced, or new installations had the choice. They could either stay with the division concept or go with the zone concept. However, in Canada, when they updated their Canadian electric code the year afterwards, I think it was 1997, they stipulated that all new installations must follow the zone concept. So in Canada, every new installation is around the zone concept. In the US, probably 90% of the installations are still around the division concept.
Okay, well, there was a live question here, but I'm not sure. It says most countries have their own local requirement and variation. Does trainers certified need to additional course training, or these are covered or a level in? I guess it's what you answered before, depends what the customer wants. But in reality, all schemes should be valid
So,
everywhere.
yeah, well, I was down in Brazil late last year. I was doing training the IECEx course, and of course in Brazil they follow the ABNT NBR Brazilian standards, which are based upon the IEC standards. But there are some differences as far as some of the practical installations and details that are not really spelled out within the IEC standards. And so, and even in Australia, Australian has the general wiring regulations around the AS 3000 standards, and but yet their EX requirements are pretty much based upon the IEC standards. So the hazardous location stuff is generally pretty much the same worldwide for the most part. There are some little variations. India is slightly different. Japan is different, but China, Russia, various parts in the Middle East, Europe. I mean, we all are pretty much doing the same thing, but there are some variations with regards to maybe general purpose wiring requirements that could throw it a little bit in a loop. So when I do training, for example, when I did it down in Brazil, I boned up on some of the other requirements that are not necessarily spelled out within the IEC standards specifically for Brazil to make sure that those individuals understood, and they understood it. They knew that. They didn't know the HAZLOC side. They knew the general purpose wiring requirements.
Okay, I do ensure that personnel working in an explosive atmosphere hazardous location are adequately trained and qualified. And what are the key components of the certification process? Well, I guess this is, the competency scheme. Here we go.
Yeah. So there you go. This is how you can determine if you decided to go that route, right? The IECEx has that's the certificate, and that's actually an updated version. And again, these are, you can check to see if the certificates reference these types of roles and responsibilities. So installations, inspections, all that. The IECEx, again, you can download those off the IECEx website. On the Compex, they'll have a certificate. It doesn't look quite like that one, but there'll be a Compex certificate that will reference an individual as to which particular modules that they'll actually be, they will have. And under Compex, you can go to their Compex website and you can validate whether or not a certificate is valid, but you cannot download the certificates. But both certificates are good for 5 years. And again, in some cases, Compex would be the one to go with. In other cases, the IECEx would be the one.
Since we said, that both are similar, and what are the costs, Are they similar costs? What are the fees?
Yeah, generally they're fairly similar. Now, I will say this much. If I was in the UK, I would do Compex because the UK is primarily, a lot of people know Compex. And there's a lot of Compex centers in the UK. I think there's 33 in the UK. Now, Compex in the United States, because we don't recognize it, it's not something that's spelled out in any regulations. There's literally only 2 centers. So, if I want to get the best price, I would probably go to the UK because there's centers all over the place and they're all competing for the same business. Here in the United States, you have 2 centers. We're both located in Houston, and there's just not the demand. And the same thing somewhat holds true under the IECEx. There's only 2 centers in the United States that are set up to do IECEx. We're one, UL is another one. They're both similar in price. I'd say the IECEx, it's a little bit tough to compare because you could take, say, one module where maybe the traditional Compex, you might take 4 modules is built in as one program, if you will. So you really have to kind of compare the apples to apples as far as which modules you take, that would be the equivalent of the Compex
So
certificate.
basically, there's not a fixed fee. It depends on the provider.
Right.
So you can shop around.
That's right. Yeah. So both organizations, right? There's a fee paid to the IECEx and there's a fee paid to JT Limited, and that's a fixed fee, and that's per student. Everything above and beyond that is left up to the center, the training provider, the certification body, whomever it is.
Okay. Let's see, next question. Can you provide an example of a typical EX register document, as in my position to create a full register for our project?
Yeah. So this is just an example, right? But you're going to have things on a register that's basically going to be your equipment identification, the data. You're going to have serial numbers. If there's an IP rating, where's the project area? And then the important things we want to have is what is our zone characteristics? Is it zone 1, zone 2? You know, we need to make sure we have equipment temperature range, which are EPLs, gas groups, T codes. What's our protection concepts? And then, of course, we want to have the certificate number and when it was issued. And you see on the last column there, special conditions. A lot of certs, whether or not they're ATEX or IECEx, if it has an X at the end of the certificate, that means that there is something about that product in which it has to be installed in accordance to the certificate that is above and beyond the requirements. That's what's spelled out within the standard. So it's very important if I'm doing an installation or inspection, I pay particular close attention to that X condition. I'll give you one example, a quick example. I did an inspection a couple of years ago in which a lot of cable glands were installed, and they all had an X condition. And the X condition for that particular cable gland stated that it was for a fixed installation, which all cable glands will have that. That wasn't the issue. But because it did not meet the pullout requirements, it required the fact that some means of providing strain relief was installed within 300 millimeters of the end of the cable. Now they had literally hundreds of cable glands, and probably half of them didn't have that strain relief. And so I had to write that up, and they ended up having to attach, in some cases, build angle iron structure to go ahead and install, provide strain relief to the cable. So
not happy about your report.
They were not happy, no.
You guys will get a copy of this presentation, so you can take this as your example. Let's see next. We are in, okay, and well, I guess that's the end of it. We are interested in a webinar. So there is a lot of webinars we do. I shared earlier at, well, that was on training, but on our website, you can have, you can look our webinar schedule. You know, we do webinars on functional safety, on application, on intrinsic safety, on EX. So we have one last poll to run because I think, let me launch it. And, you know, just rate Bob, don't rate me, because otherwise I'd be rate poor, just my English alone.
If it's poor, it's Paulo.
And as I said, you will get copies. There's a recording. You can view it back in on our YouTube channel. And eventually, any question you have, when you can post, you know, through via email, we can try to answer. Now, live, there are no more questions, so I guess we're about to close. Let me close this.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that too. If you do have questions, and again, any EX question that you might run into, I know we answered quite a few, but feel free to get a hold of me at the GM International one, or my company's name is Source IEX. You can reach me at, you know, sourceiex.com.
Absolutely.
Just drop me a note and I'll be happy to try to answer your question. Or if you have some questions specifically that I didn't address with regards to the training programs, or just some suggestions or ideas or anything that, you know, you're interested in, just drop me a note.
Okay, I'm sharing the, so we had 85% excellent, so good. Okay. All right, it is, well, I see there's one more question. I'm interested in SEAL study. Well, SEAL, you can, we you know, come on, go on our website. We have a lot of SEAL courses. In fact, there's one ongoing right now. We have online courses and live courses, same as this, the CompCX scheme. We have functional safety courses and training, and you can get your certification as well.
Yep.
Okay, I think it's spot on 1 hour. Thank you, Bob.
Wow. Wow. Amazing.
Thanks. Thanks again. Thanks for your competency. That's
Yeah.
what we need.
It's always great talking to you, Paulo, and thank you very much for everybody that joined us today. And again, hopefully reach out to us if we can help. And by the way, a little plug on the functional safety course that GMI offers. It is if you're at all interested in functional safety, they have a couple gentlemen that do the training, but the main gentleman, Tino, if you've not known him, he is by far and away the best person in functional safety training of anybody that I've ever met. I went through his course years ago and does a fantastic job. And he
Just
breaks.
like you are the best in EX. There's no doubt about
No.
that. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Thank you, Bob.
All right. Thank
Have a
you.
good
Ciao.
inspection.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'll stay warm.
Let's hope it goes well for your
Yeah.
customer. Ciao, ciao. Ciao,
Ciao.
guys. Bye-bye.